Desegregation of schools. How Brown v. Board broke the walls of segregation and became one of the most important frontiers in American history. In early 1951, Linda Carroll Brown was denied access to the all-white Sumner School in Topeka, Kansas. She didn't know it yet, but her denied entrance would be nationally known as Brown v. Board, one of the most well-known equalization frontiers in American history. Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas was a U.S. Supreme Court case that resulted from continuous oppression of racial minorities, specifically Black Americans, and it became the legal grounds for desegregation of schools nationwide, and later the catalyst fueling many movements for equality, creating the modern America we know today.
Brown v. Board was caused not only by Linda Brown's rejection. The case began its slow build while America was still in its youth. Slavery in America removed the rights of primarily African Americans, and even after being abolished by President Lincoln via the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, racialized groups in America had to fight long and hard to be recognized as American citizens. Two amendments were passed after the Emancipation Proclamation.
The 14th Amendment granted equal rights and protection under law for all citizens born and naturalized in the United States in 1868, and the 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote for African American men in 1870. Though these amendments had been put into law, separation of minorities in America remained legalized, creating a system that viewed different as second class.
This system became more publicly recognized after the 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson. After Homer Plessy refused to leave a whites-only railcar and was arrested, he went to the Supreme Court in hopes of illegalizing his treatment. But the ruling was not in his favor, and instead worked around the 14th Amendment statement that all citizens should have equal rights and protection. The Supreme Court ruled separate but equal, with the idea that the races could remain separate as long as accommodations were equal, which most often they were not, causing decades of laws maintaining segregation.
Plessy v. Ferguson was one of the biggest setbacks in the fight for civil rights. But America's history isn't filled solely with losses. Though smaller than Brown, Westminster v. Mendez became the case that desegregated California schools in 1947 and set the legal precedent for Brown v. Board. This case displayed to the American public that, though unpopular, legalizing integration in a school setting was possible.
4 years later and over 1,000 miles away, Linda Brown's father, Oliver Brown, decided it was time for a change. Linda Brown had attended the all-black Monroe Elementary School 2 miles away from her home for 4 years. In Topeka, there were 18 white elementary schools and only 4 colored elementary schools. Brown attempted to enroll his daughter in Sumner School, a historically white school, because it was only 4 blocks away from their home.
These were the circumstances which so angered Black parents. My father pondered why. Why should our children have to travel so far to school, facing unbearable winter weather, waiting for a badly overcrowded school bus to carry them some 2 miles across town when there is a school only 4 blocks from our home?
The school board, however, rejected the application.
12 other families shared similar stories that year and were all denied. In late February of 1951, these 13 families sued the school board with the help of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, for denying their children's applications and depriving them of an education solely because of the color of their skin. Brown was represented by a multitude of NAACP lawyers, but one lawyer in particular, Thurgood Marshall, became the face of the case. The mind behind Brown, however, had been Charles Hamilton Houston, who sadly passed before progress had been made.
The District Court of Topeka ruled in favor of maintaining segregation, but the families pushed even harder, taking the case to the Supreme Court in hopes of giving their children the education they deserved and the possibility of achieving equal education for all children throughout the U.S. In 1952, the case was compounded with 4 cases from other states fighting similar battles.
Two years after the case had reached the Supreme Court, on May 17, 1954, a decision had been made. The court had ruled unanimously in favor of Brown and overturned the demeaning ruling of Plessy v. Ferguson.
Immediately, the country divided itself. Many white people began protesting the decision, claiming race mixing was communism, while people of color everywhere rejoiced.
Brown v. Board's ruling was not only essential in desegregating schools, but also in fueling the bulk of the civil rights movement.
We have a 5-point program already in effect which will clean up and end segregation on the coaches in the South. Then we're going to the bus transportation area. From there, we're going to local transportation in the several cities. But I emphasize that has already started. That campaign has been going on since last year.
In 1955, Rosa Parks, an active member of the NAACP, sparked the bus boycott and a good test case challenging Montgomery's bus segregation in court. Her actions were planned, and with the help of both working-class African-American citizens and women activists, public transportation in Montgomery and soon all over the nation was desegregated.
Though Brown's decision laid down the legality of desegregation, the fight was far from over. In 1957, 3 years after Brown and the official desegregation of schools, 9 African-American teens enrolled in Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. They were met with so many outraged students and parents blocking their entrance to the school that the National Guard was called in to escort them through. These teens became known as the Little Rock Nine for their resilience in the face of adversity.
Another case of an African-American student federally escorted to school was little Ruby Bridges. Only 6 at the time, Ruby was the first black student to desegregate William Frantz Elementary School in 1960. Ruby and 5 other children had passed a test that said they were ready for a higher level of education. 2 of the students were pulled from the program because their parents feared for their safety. The other 3 students, Leona Tate, Gail Etienne, and Tessie Prevost, were sent to a neighboring white school. These girls became known as the New Orleans Four.
10 years after Brown, the arduous work of these individuals had finally paid off. The president had completely outlawed segregation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlawed discriminatory voting practices adopted in several southern states after the Civil War, such as the literacy test used as a prerequisite to vote. Brown v. Board's decision redefined the Constitution, and by doing so, it redefined America's definition of equality and what it means to be an American citizen.
Several movements searching for justice and equality were able to use this revised constitution as supporting evidence for their cause. Brown v. Board's ruling declared the separate but equal doctrine unconstitutional and created a domino effect for several movements: women's rights and feminist movements, fights for other minority rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and rights for people with disabilities.
Brown's ruling laid the foundation for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the federal law requiring access to free, suitable education for all children with disabilities. Prior to this act, about 1 million children with intellectual and developmental disabilities received no education from the public school system. The court had noted in Brown v. Board, separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, and this statement allowed integration of people with disabilities into all aspects of society. Slowly but surely, opportunities were opened to more than just able straight white men, and the government began to recognize the diversity of their American people. After centuries of mistreatment and prejudice, racialized groups began to stand up for themselves, one small battle at a time. They experienced both wins and losses, but no matter the size or outcome, they all contributed for the frontier for racial equality in the U.S. Brown v. Board's ruling pushed for the reconceptualization of the racial caste system that had been supported and tolerated by the American government since the end of the 19th century. The case's decision brought hope and inspiration to millions of Americans, as it became proof that justice and equal opportunity for all was achievable in America. Racial equality in America is still heavily debated today, but our nation is now actively making an effort, despite differences in race, religion, sex, and ethnic origin, and there has been a great deal of social change over the past few decades.
Brown v. Board of Education wasn't just a fight for Linda Carroll Brown's education. It was a fight for the education of all the children of America, a promise of equality for all individuals in America in all aspects of society. But the question remains, has America lived up to that promise?